Hello, what's up, guys? For anybody who is here wondering about our progress, um, this is going to be a little progress update, progress report on where low poly shader is going. So I call this halftone pixel dither, or halftone pixel shader, because it's based off of the halftone principle for shading. It heavily relies on both the main light and auxiliary lights. So like this spotlight right here, that's overblown out, just because examples. So let's boot it up and check it out. And it's gonna take a while because it's gonna assemble the shader. It's There it goes. So we use two resolutions here. So one of them is gonna be 640 by 480, and these are kind of like we virtualize them in a way. So when this gets if this gets put into a game, instead what you'll do is your virtual output will be upscaled to whatever you use. So 640 by 480 is mine, so it'll probably be upscaled to something that is close to HD. We might put the sides on, I don't know. And then of course SDI, which is just a half res. So yeah, and you can see the dither's gone here because we're not set for it. So if I set the density for it, and there we go. So how does this operate? Ooh, we have no shadows. Let's see, I probably disabled that. Let's see, ignore main light, use screen space, VGA, spot shadow, there it is. So how this works is it basically just hooks into the lighting system for whatever drivers of choice is running through. So because this is Unity, the driver of choice is either DirectX 11 or Vulkan. Don't ask me what version of Vulkan at the moment, but it's between those two. We don't do any like ray tracing commands or anything to figure this out. All we do is we get the drop off and in the tone, and then we define using the typical halftone method. Define the drop off using a dither pattern, kind of similar to something like this, but a lot more simplistic. Just where we use 4 shades of gray um, to define the calculation or the half steps for that halftone. So like the lightest color will be the full, and then the second one down from that will be our quarter, and then our half, and then our 2 quarters, our half, and then our 3 quarters, and then our full. And that's kind of how we step down. So we only have 4 shades for this, and of course, like you can make that bigger by swapping shadow pattern out, which you know in Unity in all of its glory likes to just filter and then scale up a tiny texture. So tiny 4 pixel texture is just going to look like a mess over there. But yeah, you can use bigger textures and they'll show up and be part of your halftone. And it just depends on what resolution you want to work at and what pattern you want to do. So I've tested this with other dither patterns and it works fine. It's just kind of up to the user and what they want to show. But yeah, it interacts fully with local light. So I have an invisible, in a way, object attached to this sprite. And what it does is it just it interacts like anything else. It's got shadow cast turned off, but rendering on the mesh itself turned off. And that was kind of one of the biggest things I wanted to set up with this lighting system. Now I feel like this system is what really is going to help a lot of people kind of move past the cheap methods of doing pixel art and low poly and whatnot in games these days. Usually, like 90% of the time, it's all post processing. So they'll render the image, and then what they'll do is they'll set up a pipeline for post where it will essentially take the image, crunch it all the way down to a lower resolution, And either they'll stick with that or they'll posterize it afterwards so that they can get smooth transitions for anti-aliasing, but it looks weird. And the big reason I say that it looks weird is because, like, if we're emulating low poly, um, consoles like the PlayStation, especially the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn couldn't do anti-aliasing to save its life, and it didn't matter because it was on a CRT. Um, but consoles like the N64 could do like something small, like 2 or 4x, I believe, MSAA anti-aliasing, and that was a very heavy process, like 2 or 3 games that actually used it, and it's not like it would have helped very much in that scenario if you were running it on a TV. Now, if you're running it on a high quality monitor, even through uh, composite, it would have probably helped, but most people were running it through their family TV in the living room. So we're trying to work with that and bring it to modern technology. Everything's LCDs and OLEDs. How do we work with that? Well, uh, instead of leaning away from the hard edges, we're going to lean farther into it to really get that pixel vibe and benefit kind of from the tech today. And so that's why I'm like ignoring anti-aliasing, ignoring any post-processing. We're not doing any post here, except for, once again, your screen resizing. That will definitely be post, but that's okay. That's fine. That's not a lot of GPU power. But a lot of GPU power is going into shading. So I've noticed that this is kind of slow on ARM systems. So this wouldn't be something that you would put on like the Nintendo Switch unless you really knew what you were doing and you were ready to like bake some of these lights and whatnot and set it up very a particular method, just because I don't think the Switch has enough pipelines for it. But anything from that generation of consoles all the way up to, especially now, home consoles and computers now, even computers with a weaker graphics card, like let's say somebody's still rocking a 1070 1080 GTX, could probably easily do this without screaming. And of course, once again, that lower resolution like really just kind of wraps it around. So that's kind of like the tech specs about how this shader works and whatnot and what it could work with. So let's talk about the next thing, like the structure of it and all of this. The next part is just all of our lighting. Like, I made sure that not only would this work with natural lights, so that's why we have this white light over here as our natural light, something that could complement the scene and look fine without blowing out the scene too much. Of course, unless like it's super bright out, which I've set the sun script on this to be kind of closer to dusk. But either way, it's set to also work with color lights because mood is everything. Not all the time you're going to crank lights up to a solid green, solid blue, or solid red, but you are going to use hints of it, subtleties, just to set moods. And the best thing I wanted to incorporate is a mixed lighting system that followed the dither pattern. And we can see it right here. Like, if you look in the magnifier, you can see the dither carry over. And if it looks a little odd, like some pixels are bigger than others, it's just the magnifier. That has nothing to do with how it's going to be interpreted outside of Unity onto its own dependent app, as long as the output res is scaled appropriately. But yeah, the biggest thing was setting up the mixing and whatnot. And so like that's what we've done here. We use and we're going to talk about this segment down here first. We used a set of variables to kind of define this. So um, the first thing I want to talk about is like using VGA lighting, which, as you can tell, just instantly posterizes this and of course blows out the center, and that's just because the light is a bit bright. But of course we could set the color count down. Now what this does is this sets the color count, and we're gonna fix this in the future to where it gives us a more of an accurate total color count instead of a color mix per light count. So right now it's set to 4, which is basically, like, for instance, this red light, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, not including the mask. 4 lights, and it just goes up from there. But it's not very accurate. Sometimes it'll say that it's a lower number than what's actually being displayed per light. Sometimes it says it's a higher number. But the main point of it is that we can control the number of lights we want per scene. And so for the posterized one, this one might give you more of a PlayStation effect for those of you who want low poly textures but still want to maintain a little bit of filtering, which is something that was done very often, very common. It was very common on the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. And so having a posterized light that gives this kind of VGA drop-off feel really, really looks good. And of course, for people who want to do the faux 3D scenes but fit the VGA spec, at least to an aesthetic rather than, you know, be strict about it, this light will help you set that, because then you get these nice color bandings as you go down. You can bring it up and whatnot, and it still does the nice posterizing banding. But that's how the VGA lighting works. And of course, the same thing goes here. Like the more you set up, the more colors it can pick from all the way down to. Obviously, if we've only got 4, then it can only mix to make red and yellow for our natural light set. But I like to set it to something simple like 12 or 9 or 8 or something high enough to where like the colors mix well. And that's that's kind of what it's set here too. So the next thing I want to talk about is our spot shadows, which we just saw earlier. That's all it is we can just simplify the shader pipeline by turning that off, and that saves us some cycles. So for lights that don't need to have interactive shadows, or they're baked in, or they're going to be baked in, you know, that's just a nice setup to have. The next thing is ignore main light. So currently it's turned on. This is because the main light kind of the main light in your scene will set kind of a global shading for everything and act like the sun. And so sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. Like in this case, if we turn it off, we can see a little bit of dither, and that's because it's just it's starting to shade things that are facing away, or being what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of having a little bit of ambient occlusion going on by objects around it and stuff like that. And there are times when that might be necessary and fun to use, and times where it might not be. So having the ability to turn it on and off per object, per material is really good. If we go to the sun right here and we actually set, let's see, we change some of the angles. This might not be the angle we want to change. This one, yeah. You can see how the light starts changing it, but the key point I wanted to bring out here is it's completely adjustable here as well. But to take the step even further, what we've also added is this one's kind of segueing into our next one from here to up here, is our shade color, shade multiplier, and shade pattern. So, you know, we can set the multiplier to be just the solid color, or a solid color of this, and it's multiplied on, so it's going to always be darker than what it normally otherwise would look like. And you can set it to anything you want. You can set it to red, you can set it to magenta, to blue, cyan, green, everything that your heart desires, essentially. So let's get this back to where it was. I think it was about right. Oh, looks like we've got. And the key point about this is that you, just like using a spotlight to set the mood and set the tone for a scene, you'll do the same for this if you need your main light shading. This is going to set that shade color for you in the exact same way, and it does that drop off in a similar instance, except instead of dropping off from the light source, it drops off from the ambient down to the shade. And so there's no spotlight to go off of. It just ramps based off of the face object towards the light, if any of that makes sense. So let's reset this a little bit. I always like it to be a bit subtle. I'm gonna turn it off anyways because I don't need it for this project in particular, but it's there for anybody who does. The next one I want to go to is obviously down here our pattern size and our density. Now our density is based on our screen width. And so like if I move this back from our SDI, which is 320 by 240 to 640 by 480, we're going to see that the dither kind of looks a little awkward because there's these half pixel steps. It kind of looks like AI art made this. And we really don't want that. So this will probably be automatic in the future. There'll probably be a toggle that says, hey, set density to automatic, and it'll figure out based on your resolution what to set the um, the dither drop off resolution to be. So for this instance, I want it to be half the width. So that would be 320, and there we go. It fixes the drop off. So that's the other part of that. Pattern size is derived from this, so they attach directly to each other. This is just in case you want to do some weird warp effects for it. It's essentially just the size, the scale of this um, across the UV, if you will, that the light projects, and then density just defines, okay, you know, how small or how large is this going to be projected. So obviously, like a smaller density, we're going to get smaller squares. So if I bring this down to let's say 1, yeah, we're going to get almost nothing. But the bigger I go, you know, the bigger the squares are. The dither is. So 320. Set that back. The last two things I want to talk about are our emissive and our regular surface. Now the surface shader is just as is. It's what you normally expect. There's a texture that you put on, and that's your base texture. We have this secondary thing called dither occlude. We'll talk about that in a second. But the first thing we're going to talk about is color. And color does exactly what it does. It's just an additive. And this is just in case for whatever reason you need to adjust the scene tone. It's another mood setter, and that's all it is. And that's how you can take it. So like for instance, let's say I wanted to emulate our our dusk, like our vibe of dusk time a little bit better, and we could try and adjust this on the fly in a script and get get more realistic tones and maybe even get unique tones between dusk and dawn, depending on what kind of lighting system you want. If you want that to be driven by the main light or by the shader, or if you want them to work in tandem. And the next one is dither occlude. Now if I drop this down, you're going to see everything's going to kind of turn into this dither effect. So I'm going to bring it back up, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the texture that has the trees. I want to say it's this one. There we go. And let me zoom out a bit so we can see. And this one is for object occlusion. So essentially it's if your character is behind an object that's a bit taller than they are and you still want them to be seen, and that object's visibility isn't of utmost importance. Obviously I have, for testing methods, I have this material placed onto numerous different objects, but you can do this on a per object basis. And once again, in script, you can just go, oh, the character's behind it. Let's fade down to, you know, like 0.7 per 0.8, something like that. However low you want to go, and it'll dither fade it all the way down to none. And it looks like it actually fades fully out by 50 by the time you hit 50. So we'll have to readjust that display here. And then the last thing I want to talk about is emissive textures. So this one I'm going to actually have to go back and change the sun again. So let's see, sun. And what we're going to do is we're just going to set our slider to nighttime. Looks like I didn't set the shader appropriately over there. That spotlight's still looking a little weird. Let's see, it's not this one, it's It's polar color. There we go. Yeah, yeah. So it looks like I just had a few more colors than I needed to add. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is once again the emissive. For those of you who know what emissive textures are, they are essentially these, where they're just solid, bright white. Sometimes they have bloom around them. It just depends on how you set up the shader. I don't work on bloom on any of these. I probably should. I probably should allow a bloom texture to be input and figure out that process. But once again, this shader is it's supposed to hit a very specific niche, and it's supposed to not work out to looking as kind of fake or half done or half baked as some of the more the current methods being used in some of these low poly projects. But you know, I always like to make sure it's versatile and there are options for everybody. So I might do an offshoot of this entire shader in the future that all it does is everything, and then we'll have two separates. One that does stuff that's just already like VGA locked and does have that bloom and whatnot, and then one that just does the pixel style. That way there's an option for everybody and they don't have to use the heavyweight one if they don't need it. So, uh, like I said, the last one is this emissive texture, and all it does is it sets a full bright cutout and masks everything around it. And this is kind of how we get away with these windows and making them look lit during the day. Um, if we set it up appropriately in the sun, which is script, which is a light and emissive control, it can take these materials and it can look for the emissive. I think the script is a little old, so I don't think it'll be able to find the emissive texture from these or the emissive level from these just yet. But otherwise, if it's set appropriately, then whenever you do the day and night, it'll actually fade between. And that goes into our next thing and our last thing, which is that we can set the emissive display. Oop, looks like we have this for all objects. We need to find objects that just have emissive textures. So that's probably this, this one, not that one, maybe this one, and maybe this one. And what we can do is we can turn the lights off whenever we want. Yeah, looks like I did pick one wrong texture. There we go. Yeah, so we can turn the lights on and off, depending on if we want it day or night. And of course, it takes the emissive texture because you need to overlay that. It can't just find it from that material. That's for those of you who don't know, emissive textures work. Just that's not how it's gonna work. And then of course you can set the color just like you can with our regular input texture. So for instance, if we want like this building to have like uh, a setup in story where like there's a fire going on inside of it and whatnot, and you know we'll put some like flame sprites all around it and junk like that, but we want it to really kind of give that feel that the flames aren't just on top of it but in it. We could do something like this with our emissive texture, but maybe for all the windows or something like that. Of course our ramp would be a little bit different. So usually if I'm going to do that kind of setup, our ramp isn't going to be yellow, white, or off white and this off gray. Instead, I'd do a full grayscale. That way, it'll take the color a bit better, so that whenever we do go, oh, we're moving from here to here, you know, or from here to here and bringing it down a bit, then we can get that vibe a bit better. And of course, you know, like let's say, oh man, like somebody's got their gamer rig set up. Sorry to drop one of those normal memes into this video, but yeah, you know, you can set that up too, you know, have it be any color you want for the emissive texture. And the way that works is all it does is it just avoids the entire lighting pipeline, and all it does is it says, hey, whenever you're done processing, just put put this texture on top and apply any of the user input settings to it. So if you try and cast a light to it, for instance, like this light right here, and we can see just a little bit right there, it has no effect on it. That's just because it bypasses the pipeline altogether and stables itself the on top of the texture once it's already processed lights. So that is our update for the Pixel Dither shader. So thank you guys so much for coming in and seeing our progress report on this. It's almost done. There are still some glitches. Like I said, there are number counts that don't work. There are things that, well, don't work. There are debug values like shade cosine and light cosine, because those don't need to be touched anymore, that need to go away. There are values like VGA color count that aren't accurate. And then same thing for dither occlude, where the clamp is still a little bit way out there. And half the slider just has no effect. But otherwise, it's in fact, yeah, see this one works fine. But otherwise, it's almost done. The last thing that needs to happen is it needs to process. It needs to pass the compile process test. So basically, I need to be able to compile it into a script that doesn't have to wait so long, at least, to build and then be driven by the graphics engine. So that's going to take a little bit of time. I've done some tests on it, and it has mixed results. So we'll get there. Baby steps, of course. The last thing is the potential of this being in Godot and Unreal. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. To be honest, I'm really thinking about it. Godot has been moving forward really quickly, and 3D is starting to mature on that platform. It's still in the early stages, I would think, but it's getting there. And then for Unreal, this is something that Unreal could easily push out, no problem, and probably be more optimized. It'll probably default on the Vulkan rather than DirectX. And I tend to find that some processes, when applied well and applied right, tend to work better on those kinds of setups. So yeah, this should be set up for anything, whether it's DirectX or Vulkan. But we still have a bit to go before we're ready. All right, guys. Once again, thanks so much for checking this out and whatnot. See you in the next update. I don't know when this is going to be available, but hopefully sometime this year. If it is, it's going to cost money, but don't worry. I'm not going to charge $100. I'm not going to charge $50. I'm probably not even going to charge $20 for it. It'll be something cheap. It'll probably be like $5. We'll figure that out later, though. Um, Otherwise, yeah. Peace. See you in the next update.